The gravel road that led to Daniel Hartwell's place was the kind that punished vehicles into early graves. Two ruts cut through dried mud and clumps of fescue, narrowing between a rusted fence post on the left and a ditch full of brown water on the right. His nearest neighbor, old Raymond Finch, lived a quarter-mile back the way you came, which meant that for most practical purposes, Daniel lived alone at the end of a road that nobody drove without reason. He had been on this land 7 years. He'd bought it when the price was low because the well had run dry, and he'd spent the first 2 summers digging by hand until he hit something. The farmhouse itself was 2 stories of faded white clapboard with a porch that sagged on the west end and a kitchen window that had to be propped open with a hammer handle every time you wanted a cross breeze. But it sat on 11 acres of flat ground in Holt County, Pennsylvania, with a view of the eastern hills that on clear mornings looked almost painted. And Daniel had long since decided that was enough. He was 34 years old. He had a daughter named Lily who had turned 6 in August. And he had a workshop behind the house where he repaired agricultural equipment for the farms scattered across the valley. He fixed balers, combines, irrigation pumps, engine blocks. He drove a 2009 pickup that burned a quart of oil every 300 miles and played only one radio station, a country station out of Carlisle that he barely tolerated but never changed. If you asked the people in town what they knew about Daniel Hartwell, most would say he was quiet. A few would say he was strange, the kind of strange that came from keeping to yourself too long. The woman at the feed store, Carol Beeson, had told her friend twice now that Daniel gave her an uneasy feeling, though she couldn't say precisely why. The hardware store owner, Grant Mercer, had lent Daniel a specialty drill bit 2 winters ago and never mentioned it again, because he'd felt something like pity and had not known what to do with it. Nobody remembered that Daniel had once worked as a structural engineer in Pittsburgh. Nobody knew because Daniel had never told them that he'd spent 3 years on bridge rehabilitation contracts, that he had 2 patents in his name, that he no longer collected royalties on, or that he had come to Holt County after a series of events he thought about only in the middle of the night when Lily was asleep, and the house was still enough that the sound of his own breathing seemed too loud. His wife Claire had died when Lily was 14 months old, a car accident on the I-376, a wet night, a truck that crossed the median. He had received that phone call in the parking garage of a project site and had sat in his truck for 2 hours without being able to drive. After that, Pittsburgh had no longer made sense as a place to be. He had come to Holt County because he needed something simple and immediate work he could see the results of with his hands, land he could stand on, a quiet that was not emptiness but something more like steadiness. For the most part, he had found it. The work paid the bills, barely. The land asked nothing except his attention, and Lily had grown into a child who still believed, with a conviction that sometimes made Daniel's chest ache, that her father was the most capable person in the world. That belief was not entirely unjustified. Daniel could fix nearly anything mechanical that crossed his threshold. He could read a hydraulic diagram the way some men read newspaper headlines. He could estimate a repair cost within 5% and had never once given a customer false hope about a timeline. He was methodical, precise, and patient, qualities that served a repair shop better than charm. But charm was what the town understood, and Daniel, who had never been comfortable making himself legible to strangers, had over 7 years become simply invisible to most of Holt County. This mattered only occasionally. The October that changed everything began quietly. The hills had gone orange and deep red, and the last soybeans in the valley were being harvested on dry days when the sky turned pale blue and thin. Lily had started first grade at Holt County Elementary and came home each afternoon full of information about a girl named Maddie, who had a hamster with 3 legs, about the proper procedure for sharpening a pencil using the wall sharpener, about the fact that one of the classroom goldfish had disappeared and nobody would explain where it had gone. Daniel listened to all of it over dinner, asking follow-up questions he did not have to manufacture interest in. He had found early on that the work of single fatherhood was less exhausting when he treated Lily's observations as seriously as she intended them, which was to say, as the most important things in the world. The night the storm came was a Thursday. The forecast had called for rain, and rain arrived, but it arrived with the kind of commitment that forecasters politely describe as severe. By 9 in the evening, the power was out across 3 miles of the valley. Daniel lit the hurricane lamps in the kitchen and the front room, checked the circuit panel twice, and settled at the kitchen table with a flashlight and the invoice he'd been trying to reconcile for a week. A baler repair for the Toland farm that had ballooned to twice the original estimate because the crankshaft had turned out to be cracked in a place nobody had seen. Lily was asleep upstairs. The rain hammered the roof in waves. At 10:47, the dog started barking. Daniel did not own a dog. The barking was coming from outside, from the direction of the road, which was impossible because there were no dogs in this part of the county that ran loose at night. Or rather, there hadn't been since the Perkins family's shepherd had died the previous spring. He took the flashlight and went to the front porch. The rain was cold and diagonal, driven by a wind that came off the hills with a sound like paper tearing. He swept the flashlight beam across the gravel drive, past the fence post toward the road. There was a figure standing at the edge of the drive, maybe 40 feet out, partially visible through the curtain of rain. It was a woman. She was standing completely still, facing the house, her arms at her sides. She wore what appeared to be a blazer, entirely unsuitable for this weather, and dark trousers. And she was soaked so thoroughly that her hair lay flat against her face and neck. She was not moving. She appeared to be looking at the light from his hurricane lamp. Daniel stepped off the porch into the rain and walked toward her. She did not speak when he approached. Her eyes tracked him, but her expression was difficult to read. Not frightened exactly, but disoriented in a way that reminded him of something he couldn't name immediately. Her lips were pressed together. Her hands, when he noticed them, were shaking. "Ma'am," he said, "are you all right?" She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, very precisely, "I'm not entirely certain where I am." Her voice was steady, almost measured, the voice of someone trying to compensate for what was happening in the rest of her body. "You're on Route 9 outside Holt County," Daniel said. "About 4 miles from town." He paused. "Are you hurt?" "I don't think so." She looked down at herself as if checking. "I may have walked some distance. I'm not certain how far." He looked past her toward the road. He could not see any vehicle in the darkness. "Come inside," he said. "You need to get warm." She hesitated for just a moment. It was the hesitation of someone who was accustomed to making decisions, even diminished as she clearly was. Some part of her was still evaluating the situation, still running a calculation. Then the wind came again, and she shivered once, hard, and that settled it. The lamplight inside the kitchen was amber and steady. Daniel sat out a kitchen chair and went for towels without explaining himself, because there was nothing to explain. The woman was wet and cold, and the fastest way to address that was to act, not narrate. He brought 2 towels from the hall closet and a heavy flannel work shirt that was clean. He put a kettle on the propane burner and pointed at the bathroom off the kitchen. "The hot water still works," he said. "Shower if you need to. There's a lock on the door." She looked at him. Then she nodded once, took the shirt and the towels, and went in. Daniel sat back at the kitchen table with his invoice. He did not listen at the door. After about 20 minutes, he heard the shower cut off, and sometime after that, she came out wearing his flannel shirt over her damp trousers, her hair combed back with her fingers. She had washed her face. Without the overlay of rain and confusion, she looked different, composed. It was not a transformation so much as a recalibration, like watching someone step back into themselves. She was perhaps 38 or 40. She had dark eyes set wide apart, a strong jaw, and the kind of posture that came from years of standing at the front of rooms. She looked around the kitchen with the methodical attention of someone cataloging details. Then she sat in the chair he had left out. "I'm sorry for the intrusion," she said. "It's all right. I don't usually." She stopped. "I'm not certain what happened. There was a car. I remember being in a car." And then she touched the side of her head, just above the ear, with 2 fingers. Her expression changed slightly. Daniel got up, came around the table, and tilted the lamp closer. There was a bruise forming at her temple, pale red, darkening at the edges. "You hit your head," he said. "So it seems. You should see a doctor." She looked up at him. "The power is out. Can you make calls?" He checked his cell phone. No signal, which was normal in a hard rain when the nearest tower was 4 miles away. Not from here. Roads are flooded between town and the county route. I wouldn't put anyone on them tonight. She absorbed this information. Then the doctor will have to wait until morning, she said with a matter-of-factness that he found oddly reassuring. She was frightened, he thought, but she was not going to perform the fear. He put a mug of tea in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it. "What's your name?" he asked. She opened her mouth and then a pause, a small one, not long enough to mean anything definite, but long enough for him to notice. "Victoria," she said. "Victoria Marsh. Daniel Hartwell." He sat back down. "Do you have people I should try to reach for you in the morning?" she said. "There are people who will be looking for me by morning." He nodded. He did not press further. At some point after midnight, the storm still loud above them, the lamp burning steady on the table between them. They heard small feet on the stairs, and Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway in her striped pajamas, holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear, blinking against the light. She looked at the woman with the frank curiosity of a 6-year-old who has not yet learned to moderate her staring. Then she looked at her father. "There's a lady," she said. "Yes, there is," Daniel said. "She got caught in the storm. Her name is Victoria." Lily crossed the kitchen in her bare feet and stood next to Victoria's chair and looked at her from a distance of approximately 18 in. Victoria looked back at her with an expression that Daniel would not have been able to easily name, something that was surprise and something else, softer. "Your hair is flat," Lily observed. "It is," Victoria said. "Mine gets flat when it's wet, too." Lily set her rabbit on the table as if offering it as evidence. "Do you want to sleep in the house?" "If your father doesn't mind." Lily turned to Daniel. "She can sleep in the house," she said in the tone of someone making a formal ruling. Victoria Marsh slept in the downstairs bedroom that Daniel used for storage on an old camp cot with a proper mattress pad and 2 quilts. She slept for 9 hours straight, which surprised him when he realized it. People in genuine shock rarely slept easily. By morning, the rain had stopped. The roads were passable, but the bridge on County Route 4 had taken 2 feet of water and was closed for inspection, which meant the fastest route into town was currently 10 miles longer than normal. Victoria came into the kitchen at 7:30, while Daniel was making eggs for Lily. She was wearing her own clothes again, dried overnight on the rack near the propane heater. Her blazer had survived better than expected. She sat at the table and watched Daniel cook for a moment. "You should eat," he said without turning around. "I'm trying to remember my access codes," she said. He turned. She said it so evenly, not distressed, just informational, the way you might say I'm trying to remember where I put my keys. "For your phone?" "For several things." "Does it come back gradually?" "It seems to." She pressed her fingers to the side of her head. The bruise had gone deep purple overnight, a solid thumbprint at her temple. The broad outlines are clear. Names, places, people. It's the smaller things, sequential things, numbers. A pause. "I know who I am. That's what matters." Lily climbed into her chair at the table and began eating with the concentration of someone who takes breakfast seriously. She looked up at Victoria. "You have a bruise." "I do. I had a bruise once. I fell off the tire swing." She pointed toward the backyard. "Did it hurt?" "Yeah, but then Dad got me an ice pack and it got better." She thought about this. "We have ice packs." "Thank you," Victoria said. "I'll keep that in mind." Over the next 2 hours, Daniel managed to get a cell signal by walking to the top of the ridge behind the house, 2 bars, intermittent, and placed a call to the county non-emergency line to report that a woman had come to his property last night and to ask about any reported accidents on Route 9. The dispatcher told him there had been a single vehicle incident reported at mile marker 22 around 10:00 the previous evening, a car off the road into the drainage ditch. No occupant found at the scene. The car had been registered to a rental company. He came back and told Victoria this. She listened without visible surprise. "Where were you headed?" he asked. "Pittsburgh." "A moment. I had a meeting." She looked at the window, at the yellow field outside, at nothing in particular. "Several meetings." "There are people looking for you," he said. "The dispatcher is sending someone out when the bridge clears." She nodded. Then, to his mild surprise, she said, "May I stay until then? I'd rather not be on the roadside waiting." "You can stay as long as you need." She looked at him directly. It was the kind of look that came from a person unaccustomed to asking for things who was examining whether the offer was real. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he agreed, "but that's not a requirement." She held his gaze for a moment. Then something in her face not softened exactly, but permitted itself to be less guarded. The days that followed were not what Daniel had planned. The county road repair crew determined that the Route 4 bridge needed structural assessment before it could be open, which meant Holt County's main artery was reduced to a single long detour. The secondary roads were a mess of mud and broken gravel, and Victoria's phone found in the rental car, which had been pulled from the ditch, was destroyed. It was, objectively, a logistical problem. But it had the effect of extending what should have been a one-night stay into something longer. Victoria did not seem distressed by this. She was, he noticed, the kind of person who adapted rapidly to the requirements of a situation. She asked for things she needed in a precise, minimal way. She did not clutter the house with her presence. She helped with dinner without being asked on the second evening. Not timidly, but with the assurance of someone who had decided that contributing was the obvious thing to do. She worked the kitchen methodically, and when she made Lily's grilled cheese, she cut it into triangles, because she'd noticed Lily had once made a comment about triangles being better than rectangles, and she simply remembered it. These small attentions were not theatrical. They were quiet. Daniel noticed them and said nothing about it. What he did say something about was on the third morning when he was reviewing the Tolan invoice again at the table, the one he'd been staring at for a week. He was trying to determine how to present the doubled estimate to Martin Tolan without losing the account, because Tolan was his third largest customer, and he had a reputation for taking perceived overcharges as personal insults. Victoria was sitting across the table with a cup of coffee, having offered to get out of his way and being told she wasn't in anyone's way. She watched him for a while, then she said, "What's the conflict?" He told her. "The cracked crankshaft, the doubled estimate, the customer's reputation." She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "How did you discover the crankshaft problem?" "Halfway through the job." Which is when it always happens. You don't know what you're dealing with until you're inside. So the original estimate was made without the information that changed the cost. That's correct. Then document that, she said. Not as an apology, as a record. You list the original scope, the date of discovery, what you found, and what it changed. You present it as a technical report, not a bill. Make it clear he's getting a full account of what happened inside his machine. The cost follows from the facts. It doesn't precede them. She paused. People who feel informed rarely feel taken advantage of. Daniel looked at her for a moment. Then he rewrote the invoice the way she described. He sent it to Martin Tolan 3 days later. Tolan paid it in full without a word of complaint. He had never paid Daniel in full without negotiating before. Victoria never mentioned it. Daniel did not thank her in a way that made it into a debt, but he turned something over in his mind that night about the way she'd understood the actual problem instantly. Not the surface problem, which was the price, but the structural problem underneath it, which was communication. The town, meanwhile, had begun to notice. Carol Beeson saw a woman she didn't recognize getting into Daniel Hartwell's truck at the feed store on Thursday. She mentioned this to her neighbor, who mentioned it to Grant Mercer at the hardware store. By Friday, it had traveled through 2 church groups and the counter at Paula's diner, and by the time it reached the ears of Dale Winship, who had always thought Daniel Hartwell was vaguely suspicious and had been willing to say so at volume, it had acquired several embellishments that bore no relationship to the facts. Dale Winship appeared at Daniel's door on Saturday afternoon. He stood on the porch in a Carhartt jacket with his arms crossed and delivered in a voice he clearly intended to sound reasonable, what he described as a word to the wise, which was that strangers who appeared out of nowhere in Holt County during floods were not to be trusted, that Daniel had a young daughter to think about, and that the sheriff's office should probably be called. Daniel stood in the doorway and listened to all of this. Then he said, "She's been contacted. The situation is handled. Thank you for your concern. You're harboring someone you don't know." "I know her well enough," Daniel said. "Is there something else?" Dale Winship looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who had expected either capitulation or aggression and received neither. He left. Victoria had heard the exchange from the kitchen. She came to the doorway after Dale's truck had gone back up the drive and looked at Daniel. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "He wasn't right." She was quiet for a moment. "People in this town don't trust you much." He turned. "No, not particularly. Does that bother you?" He thought about it genuinely, the way he thought about all questions that deserved an honest answer. "Less than it used to," he said. That evening, while Lily was asleep, they sat on the porch in the cold with coffee mugs and the quiet that the valley produced after dark. Not silence, but a kind of graduated stillness. The occasional sound of something moving in the far field, the creak of the cot when the wind shifted. Victoria said, "I have a company. I'm its chief executive." He waited. "About 4,000 people work for it." She turned the mug in her hands. "We make components, precision manufacturing. I started it 12 years ago from a problem I noticed that nobody else wanted to solve." She paused. "The company is significant, I'm told." "You don't say it like it's significant. I say it like someone who hasn't slept well in 18 months, she said. "Or trusted easily in longer than that." She looked at the dark line of the hills. "I haven't been anywhere this quiet in a long time. I'm not certain I remembered it was possible." Daniel did not respond immediately. He looked at the same hills. "This land was quiet when I bought it," he said. "I thought it would help." It did. Not in the way I expected it. Didn't make me feel better. It just made things clear, things I'd been moving too fast to see. She looked at him. "What kinds of things?" "That I'd been building for outcomes instead of days." He shifted. "I'd spent years on projects that would last 100 years. Bridges. And I missed a lot of days. While I was thinking about the 100 years." She was quiet for long enough that he thought the conversation was finished. Then she said very quietly, "Yes, I know that problem well." On the 5th day, Victoria remembered more. He found her at the kitchen table early, before Lily was up, with a notebook he'd given her and a pen, writing in a small, tight hand. She had filled 3 pages. She looked up when he came in. "The name of my assistant," she said. "I finally remembered it. And our main operations address." "Good. Her name is Diane Coulter. She will have been looking for me for 5 days." A pause. "She will be." She stopped. The word she didn't say was frantic. He could see it from here. "We can get a call through," he said. "I'll drive you to the ridge." They went to the ridge together after breakfast. The signal came and went, but held long enough. He stood back and watched her face when the call connected, watched it change from the composed, self-contained thing it had been for 5 days into something more complicated and more human, as the voice on the other end said something that cracked the surface. "I know," Victoria said into the phone. "I know. I'm all right. Don't, Diane." "Diane, I am all right." A pause, listening. "Yes, the bridge is accessible now. Tomorrow should work. Can you send Garrett?" Another pause. "Tell him 2 vehicles is enough." "I don't need." She looked at Daniel. Then she turned away. "Tell him I said 2 vehicles. She did not speak on the walk back down. He did not fill the silence. It was Lily who noticed the change. That evening she climbed up next to Victoria on the old couch in the front room and said, without preamble, "Are you sad?" Victoria looked at her. "Not sad," she said, something like sad's cousin. Lily considered this classification melancholy, she said. "My dad uses that word." "Yes," Victoria said. "That's closer." "Why?" Victoria looked across the room at nothing, then back at Lily. "Because tomorrow I go back to my life," she said, "and I'm not entirely certain. I just need to think about some things differently." Lily nodded with the seriousness of someone who understood this completely, even if she couldn't have explained it. She leaned against Victoria's arm. "You can come back," she said. "We're not going anywhere." Victoria looked down at her. She said, "No, I don't suppose you are." Later that night, Daniel lay awake long after the house was still and thought about the things that had changed in 5 days without him deciding to change them, the rhythm of the house, the way meals had adjusted, the sound of another adult moving in the kitchen in the morning, the way Lily had attached to Victoria with the casual trust of a child who had not learned yet to protect that trust. He thought about what would walk out the door tomorrow. He thought about this honestly, and not for long, because honesty in this direction did not serve any purpose he could identify. He got up and went to the kitchen and looked at the invoice on the table, the one that had been fixed. He thought about the woman who had fixed it by seeing past the surface into the structure beneath. He went back to bed. He slept. The convoy appeared at the end of the gravel drive at 8:45 on a Tuesday morning. 2 black vehicles, then 3. Daniel, standing on the porch with his coffee, watched 2 more come over the low rise at the top of his road, then another. He lost count at some point. They were large, dark, late model, the kind of vehicles that suggested resources rather than vanity. They pulled in along both sides of the gravel drive in a precise alignment that could only mean they had done this kind of thing before. The valley was still. The yellow field behind the house was sharp in the morning light. The hills were the color they got in mid-October, the deepest red of the season. Doors opened. Men and women in dark clothing came out of the vehicles and stood in a line that was not quite a line, arranged in a way that looked casual and wasn't. One of them was a tall man with gray at his temples, who held a phone in his hand and surveyed the property with the expression of someone doing a security assessment. He saw Daniel on the porch and walked toward him without hurrying. Behind Daniel, the screen door opened. He heard it. He didn't turn around. The tall man stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He was looking past Daniel now, and his face, which had been professional, careful, guarded, changed. Just slightly. He came up the steps. He said, "Miss Caldwell, we've been looking for you." The valley was absolutely quiet. Daniel turned. Victoria, whom he had known for 5 days as Victoria Marsh, whom Lily had let sleep in the house, who had eaten eggs at his kitchen table and stayed up late on a cold porch talking about bridges and quiet and things that didn't get fixed by moving fast, was standing behind him in the doorway. She was wearing her blazer. It was wrinkled and it didn't matter. She was standing straight, both hands at her sides, and whatever the guard of the last 5 days had looked like, this was something different. This was weight, the weight of 4,000 people, and 30 offices and 12 years, and things she had not quite told him because she hadn't known how to fit them into the language of this kitchen, this valley, this gravel road. "Garrett," she said. Her voice was even. "Thank you for coming." She looked at Daniel. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. From inside the house came the sound of Lily's feet on the stairs, fast and light, and she appeared in the doorway and saw the cars, and her eyes went very wide. "Those are a lot of cars," she said. "Yes," Daniel said. She looked at Victoria. "Are those your cars?" Victoria looked at Lily for a moment with an expression that was too many things at once for him to read all the way through. "Yes," she said, "they are." The next 2 hours were the kind that rearranged things. Garrett, whose last name turned out to be Eames, and who held some title in Victoria's organization that Daniel never fully understood, moved through the property with a quiet efficiency that was not rude, but was also not interested in the context of Daniel's life. He was interested in Victoria. He handed her a phone. He handed her a folder. He spoke to her in a low, continuous voice about things Daniel could hear. Fragments of the board meeting was delayed. The Pittsburgh situation has been escalated. Your legal team needs a call by noon. The press is all ready. Victoria listened. Her face was the face of someone coming back into load-bearing position. It was Carol from the feed store who called first. By 9:30, the calls were coming to people across the valley. There was a thing happening at the Hartwell place. There were cars. What was going on? Who was that woman? By 10:00, 3 vehicles had stopped at the top of the road. By 10:15, there were people standing on the shoulder looking down toward the property. Daniel recognized Dale Winship among them, which he thought was probably inevitable. He was standing by his truck when Victoria came to him. Garrett was on the far side of the drive, speaking into a phone. The rest of her people were doing things with an efficiency that made Daniel conscious of how empty and still his valley usually was. "I should explain myself," she said. "You don't owe me. I want to." She stopped. "My name is Victoria Caldwell. I'm the chief executive of Caldwell Precision Industries. We make components for aerospace and medical devices and several other industries I could list but won't." She paused. "I have a net worth that I find uncomfortable to think about in the context of this conversation." Daniel said nothing. "I was driving to Pittsburgh for a board meeting I had been dreading for 6 weeks," she said. "The accident was genuine. I went into the ditch on Route 9, and the head injury was genuine, and the confusion was genuine. She was looking at him steadily. The name I gave you was not. I'm sorry for that. I gave you a name that couldn't be tracked. Why? She looked down briefly. Because I have a history of people appearing in my life who are interested in what I have rather than who I am. I didn't know where I was or who you were. I was hurt and alone, and I made a decision. She looked up. It was the wrong decision for the wrong reason. You were never someone I needed to protect myself from. No, he said. I know. She held his gaze. You knew the whole time, didn't you? It wasn't a question. He thought about it anyway. Not the specifics, he said, but something. Yes, and you kept me here anyway. You were cold and you had a head injury, he said. The rest of it. He stopped. The rest of it didn't seem relevant. She was quiet for a moment. Something moved across her face that was difficult to see because she was fighting to keep it still. From the end of the drive, Lily appeared at a run heading toward them from the direction of the house, where she had been talking to one of Victoria's people, a young woman named Priya, who had apparently shown her pictures of Victoria's office building on a phone because Lily arrived with wide eyes and a single piece of information she needed to share. She has a building, Lily said, pointing at Victoria. A tall one. I know, Daniel said, like a really tall one. I understand. Lily looked at Victoria. Is that yours? It is. Lily absorbed this information. Then she said with the gravity of someone who has thought carefully about what matters, does it have an elevator? Victoria looked at her for a moment. Then she did something Daniel had not seen her do in 5 days. She laughed. Not the polite kind, not the managed kind, but the kind that comes out because it can't be kept in. Yes, she said. Several. At 11, the people on the shoulder had multiplied. There were perhaps 30 of them now, and Daniel could see Grant Mercer and 2 men from the Tolan farm, and a woman whose name he didn't know, who had once refused to let Lily sit at her table at the summer fair. He could see the way they were watching his drive, looking at the cars, looking at Victoria when she moved, looking at him with the confused recalculation of people who had decided what he was long ago, and were now being told by the evidence that they were wrong. Garrett appeared at Victoria's side and spoke briefly. Victoria's expression shifted. She made a decision in about 3 seconds. She walked up the drive to the road. She walked to the place where the road and the shoulder met, and she stood there, and the people who had been watching her from a distance found themselves standing 2 feet away from her with no intermediate step. Grant Mercer stepped back. Dale Winship, to his credit, held his ground. Thank you for your concern, Victoria said. Her voice carried easily. I'm well. Mr. Hartwell found me on his property after a road accident 5 days ago. He gave me shelter, food, and medical attention. He asked nothing in return. She paused. The valley was very still. I want to make certain that's understood clearly. Dale Winship opened his mouth, closed it. He is a good man, Victoria said. The quality of a person shows most clearly in what they do when there's no reason to be kind. I hope that's also useful information. She walked back down the drive. Daniel was standing by his truck. She came and stood in front of him. Behind her, the line of people on the shoulder was very quiet. I need to go, she said. The board meeting was delayed for me. It can't be delayed further. She stopped. I want to offer you. Don't, he said, not unkindly. I want to repay. Victoria. He said her real name for the first time. You told me my customer would pay if he felt informed instead of surprised. He did. That's enough. She looked at him for a long moment. It is not enough, she said.